Old woman saved two. Freezing baby Bigfoots. What happened next shocked everyone. A winter night. The blizzard roared, hammering against the roof of a small log cabin. Inside the narrow room, Abigail, 63 years old, pulled her shawl close, listening to the wind cutting through the forest. And then, beneath that howl, she caught it. A faint cry. At first, she thought her ears were playing tricks on her. But the sound came again, high, trembling like a child lost in the storm. Her heart clenched. She opened the door. Cold rushed in, snow swirling wild and blind. And there, right against the cabin wall, two small shapes curled into the drift. She stumbled toward them, ready to call out, then froze. They weren't children, two baby Bigfoots. Their fur hung heavy and wet, their round dark eyes filled with tears, their small bodies shaking so hard it broke her heart. Fear swept over her. What if their mother was near? What if the whole tribe was watching? But as she looked at those tiny fading shapes, she knew the truth. They would not survive another hour in the storm. Abigail knelt in the snow, her hands trembling as she touched the frozen fur. And in that moment, she understood the choice she made tonight would change everything. Before we continue, tell us the city you're listening from. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Abigail had lived alone for many years in her little log cabin tucked deep in the woods. Winters had always been harsh, but she was used to the white silence, used to the loneliness. But tonight the storm was wilder than ever. The wind tore through the cracks. The roof groaned as though it might break apart. Inside the stove, fire fought to push back the bitter cold seeping through the walls. She sat quietly by the flames, clutching her shawl, wishing the night would pass quickly. And then, that faint cry from the porch pulled her to her feet. In an instant, her quiet life turned. Hand on the latch, Abigail knew outside waiting in the snow was something beyond imagination. Part 1. The Cry in the Storm. The storm raged against the forest, the cabin shuddering under every strike of the wind. Abigail pressed her ear to the door. Through the eerie howl, the cry rose again. Not long, not loud, but sharp enough to pierce her heart like a needle of ice. She drew her shawl tight, opened the door. The gale struck her face, biting into her weathered skin. Snow blurred the world into nothing but white. And still the cry lingered. Closer now. Abigail stepped down into the drift, her boots sinking deep. Each step heavy, but she pressed on. At the base of the wall, she saw them, two tiny shapes huddled in the snow. Her heart clenched. Dear Lord, two abandoned children. But as she drew near, she stopped cold, not human. Two little bodies covered in tangled fur. Two black eyes staring up, pleading. One whimpered weakly. The other pressed close, trying to shield its sibling. Their breath so thin it might vanish with the wind. Two baby Bigfoots, no taller than 4 feet, dying at her door. Her heart pounded. Legends rushed back, shadows in the forest. Stories whispered, half myth, half truth. Fear locked in her chest. Were their parents near? Was the tribe watching from the dark? She turned to the forest, nothing but storm and night. And those desperate eyes. Abigail swallowed hard. She knew if she left them, they would not see the morning. In that instant, fear no longer mattered. Only the instinct of a mother, though her own children were long gone. She knelt, her hands trembling as they touched the frozen fur. The little ones pressed closer, clinging to her warmth. Abigail drew a breath, whispering into the storm, "All right, come inside with me," and she knew her life would never be the same again. Part 2. The Choice Beyond Fear. Abigail bent low, the cold scent of snow and the faint breath of two tiny beings brushing against her face. They trembled violently, their fur clumped and matted like wet cotton. One reached out, a small fur-covered hand, 5 curled fingers clutching the edge of her shawl as though clinging to the last thread of life. Her heart tightened. Fear surged through her. If I lift them, will the whole tribe appear? Will I become their prey? She cast her eyes toward the dark forest where black trunks loomed like 1,000 watching eyes. But there was nothing but wind and swirling snow. She drew a deep breath, her chest aching from the cold. The choice was clear: leave them or save them. Her voice broke into a whisper. "You'll die if I turn away." Abigail reached out and lifted the first one. Its little body hung heavy, water-soaked fur, freezing to the bone. She bent again, gathering the second. Her arms shook with age, but her heart burned with strength. She carried them inside, kicking the wooden door shut against the storm. The stove fire threw a golden glow across the small room. The contrast sharp out there, the fury of winter. In here, a fragile moment of life clinging on. She laid the small creatures on the worn rug near the fire. The crackle of flames blended with their ragged breaths. Fear still lingered in her chest. She knew well, if these were young ones, their parents must exist. But as the firelight flickered in their wet, pleading eyes, she saw only a fragile trust placed in her hands. She pulled thick blankets from the bed, covering their shivering forms. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the damp fur. Slowly the shaking eased. One stretched out an oversized hand and touched her thin fingers. Abigail froze, then let it be. That weak grip tightened a wordless thank you. In the wavering glow, Abigail sank down, her heart pounding. Fear had not vanished, but it was giving way to something else, the long-buried instinct to protect. She knew the night would be long, but she also knew her choice had been sealed the moment she heard that cry in the storm. Part 3. Warming by the fire. In the old wooden cabin, the firelight danced against dark walls. Beside the stove, the two small beings huddled under woolen blankets. Their fur was still wet, their bodies trembling, every shallow breath cutting into Abigail's heart. She sat close, her thin hands pulling the covers snug around them. One whimpered softly, then clung to her finger. That weak, trembling hold stole her breath. The other pressed itself against her leg, its faint warmth seeping into her chest like hidden embers on a winter night. She looked into their wide black eyes, strange yet innocent. There was no wildness there, no threat, only fear, and a desperate will to live. Abigail rose and went to the rickety cupboard. From inside, she took half a stale loaf of bread. She broke it into small pieces, softened them in water, and brought them near. At first they hesitated, but hunger left no choice. Their oversized hands clumsily grabbed the pieces, chewing slowly. One gave a small rasping sound, not a warning, but something that felt like gratitude. She offered a tin cup of water. They drank quickly, spilling down their tangled fur, but in their eyes light flickered back. Warmth spread through Abigail's chest, as if the fire in her heart burned brighter than the flames in the stove. That night she did not sleep. She sat by the fire, watching each fragile breath. Every time they stirred or shivered, she adjusted the blanket, pulled them closer to the heat. At times her hand rested gently against their furry foreheads, checking for warmth. The motions came naturally, like the ones she once made for her own child, the child who had left her long ago. Outside, the wind screamed. But inside the cabin, life clung on, fragile, flickering, yet alive. And Abigail knew it was not the fire alone keeping them alive. It was compassion. Her compassion. Part 4. The first moment of trust. The fire crackled softly, its golden light flickering across Abigail's wrinkled face, and the two small beings wrapped in blankets by the stove. The cabin lay in silence, broken only by their fragile breaths and the wind howling outside. After a long while, one of the baby Bigfoots stirred. Its hand, large but trembling, reached out, fumbling for something to hold. Then it found her thin finger. The grip was weak, yet slowly tightened. Abigail flinched, then let it be. Her heart trembled, not from fear, but from the fragile trust taking root. The other pressed closer against her knee, its damp, furry body leaning into her. It lifted its gaze, wide, dark eyes shimmering in the firelight fixed on her. In that stare, there was no threat, no wildness, only the simple trust of a child. Abigail bent down slowly and laid her hand upon their heads. The wet fur made her shiver, but as she stroked gently, the trembling began to ease. Their ragged breathing steadied. Easy now. I'm here, she whispered. Her voice shook, but it carried the softness of a lullaby. The little one holding her finger let out a faint sound, not a cry, but something like a sigh of relief. It pressed its face into her palm, seeking warmth. Abigail closed her eyes. A strange feeling swelled in her chest she felt needed. For years she had lived alone in this cold cabin. But now, with two tiny beings nestled at her side, she no longer felt so alone. The night dragged on. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cabin, an invisible bond had been tied. The two young Bigfoots had chosen her as their refuge, and she, though never expecting it, had become their shelter. Part 5. A quiet dawn, shadows in the trees. The first light of day slipped through frosted cracks, washing the cabin in pale gold. Abigail stretched her aching arms after a sleepless night. On the worn rug by the stove, the two young Bigfoots lay wrapped tightly in blankets, their breath steady, their small chests rising and falling in rhythm. A rare smile softened her face. At least they had survived the cruel night. She quietly fed the fire with fresh logs, listening to the flames leap and the familiar scent of wood smoke filling the room. Stepping lightly, she drew back the ragged curtain at the window. Outside, the world lay buried in white. The storm had passed. The trees bent low under heavy snow. The air was heavy still, yet strangely peaceful. Abigail exhaled in relief, ready to turn back to her small guests. But then movement at the edge of the forest froze her in place. At first she thought it a trick of the light shadows, snow falling. But then the darkness among the trees shifted. Shapes emerged, towering, indistinct, gliding between snow-laden trunks, one after another, tall as pine shoulders, broad as cliffs. Abigail's eyes widened. Her hand gripped the window frame until it went numb. No, it can't be, she whispered. Each step crunched the snow with a heavy weight. Not 2, not 5, but dozens. Enormous figures slowly circling, drawing nearer to the cabin. Her heart pounded wildly. She turned to the two little ones, still sleeping peacefully, unaware. A chilling thought crawled down her spine. They were never abandoned. They had been found. And now, their tribe stood outside her door. The cabin seemed to shrink around her, pressed tight by the weight of unseen eyes. Abigail knew last night she had saved 2 lives. But this morning, the price of her kindness might be facing an entire tribe. Part 6. The tribe surrounds the cabin. Abigail's heart thundered in her chest as she wiped the frost from the window pane. What she saw nearly made her knees buckle. In the snow-covered clearing before the cabin, a gathering of giants stood. They did not move, did not utter a sound. They only watched in silence. Their bodies rose more than 8 feet high, shoulders broad, their breath steaming white into the frozen air, each exhale so heavy it trembled the snow beneath their feet. Abigail's eyes began to count without thinking. 10, 15, 20, 30. A long line stretched across the clearing, encircling the cabin. No howls, no threats, only silence heavier than the storm that had raged the night before. She spun around. The 2 little ones were still wrapped in blankets, their wide, dark eyes blinking as though sensing what waited outside. They stirred, whimpering softly, gazing toward the door. Abigail understood at once the tribe had come for them. Her throat went dry. She gripped the wooden frame to steady her trembling hands. A thought flashed: lock the door hide, stay inside. But she knew such defiance would bring only danger. This little cabin could never withstand the wrath of a tribe. The silence pressed in, suffocating. Abigail felt it crushing her nerves. If she didn't step out, the waiting itself might break her. She drew her shawl tighter, took a deep breath, and set her hand on the latch. All right, she whispered to herself. I saved them. Now I must face this. The wooden door creaked open. Cold wind rushed in, scattering kindling across the floor. She stepped onto the porch. At once, a towering figure moved forward, the leader. He was taller than all the rest, at least 8 feet, shoulders so wide he seemed to block the cabin door. His face held both severity and dignity. He stopped before the porch, dark eyes like deep wells fixed on Abigail. She stood frozen, hands open before her, showing she held no weapon. In the cold and silence, an unspoken confrontation began. Part 7. The Leader's Gaze. The leader did not growl. He did not advance. He simply stood a few steps away, his eyes locked on Abigail. Then his gaze shifted past her toward the firelight inside the cabin, where the two little ones were stirring awake. Abigail's chest tightened. The message was wordless yet clear. They are ours. We have come to take them home. For an instant, fear surged. But then something else rose, a quiet determination. She turned back to the little ones. They had clung to her like a mother through the night of storm and death. And now their eyes lit up at the sounds from outside. Abigail bent down, trembling, lifting them one by one. Their bodies were heavy, but they held to her fiercely, their oversized hands clutching her shawl as though refusing to let go. Their warm breaths pressed against her chest, stirring memories of the children she once held long ago. A sorrow welled up sharp, as if she were losing family all over again. She stepped outside, facing the tribe's many eyes. The wind whistled past, yet none moved. They only watched the little ones in her arms. The leader took one slow step closer, his breath curling white in the morning air. His gaze held no hatred. Instead, it glimmered with waiting. The two little ones cried out high and piercing. From the tribe, deep voices answered a rolling chorus that shook the branches heavy with snow. Abigail's breath caught. This was no threat. It was a call of family. In the frozen silence, she knew she had done the right thing, saving them. And now, one more right thing remained, returning them to their own. Bending slowly, Abigail lowered the little ones toward the snow before the leader. Part 8. The moment of letting go. Abigail knelt down, placing the two little ones on the thick snow before the porch. They resisted weakly furred hands clutching at her shawl, round dark eyes glistening with tears, unwilling to part. Her heart ached, yet her old hands gently pried, each finger loose, whispering, "Go now. Your parents are waiting." From the ranks of the tribe, two towering figures stepped forward. No rush, no thunder, only slow, heavy steps filled with dignity and a strange reverence. They bent low, their massive frames lowering to meet Abigail's height, eyes glowing with an unexpected gentleness. At once the little ones crawled toward them, their high cries rising into the air, this time not trembling, but ringing with joy. When lifted into those enormous arms, they nestled close, burying their faces against broad chests. Their cries faded to silence. The forest held its breath. Only the deep breathing of the tribe mingled with the whisper of winter wind. Abigail's trembling hands gripped the doorframe. She braced herself for a growl, a warning glare. Instead, one of the giants holding a child let out a low, resonant sound like a wordless thank you. It rolled through the air, warm enough to raise goosebumps along her spine, yet bringing a rare peace to her heart. The leader inclined his head toward her. No words, just a single nod. And in that quiet it carried the weight of sacred recognition. Part 9. A sign of gratitude. With the little ones safe in their parents' arms, the tribe did not leave at once. Silence lingered, snow drifting softly around them. Then one more figure stepped from the ranks. A tall Bigfoot carrying a branch. Its bark stripped clean, polished smooth as though shaped by careful hands. The creature came forward, halting before Abigail's porch. In its deep eyes there was no hatred, only a deliberate slowness. It bent down, laid the branch upon the snow at her door, and lifted its gaze to her once more. A single nod. Then it turned back to rejoin the tribe. Abigail stared at the branch lying against the white snow. Her heart pounded, her hand gripping the doorframe till it went numb. She knew this was no ordinary branch. It was a sign of gratitude. A silent promise that her kindness had been seen, acknowledged, honored. The leader raised one massive arm in signal. Slowly, the dark shapes began to withdraw, step by steady step, as silent as a river flowing beneath ice. Within minutes, the clearing lay empty again, as if they had never been there. Snow kept falling, covering the trail of giant footprints. Abigail stood, frozen eyes fixed on the shrouded forest. Fear had melted away, replaced by something else, an overwhelming swell of emotion. She bent, lifted the cold wooden branch, and pressed it tight against her chest. Last night she had thought she was saving 2 fragile lives, but this morning she realized she herself had been touched by a trust beyond the bounds of humankind. Part 10. A Sacred Keepsake. The forest fell silent once more. Only the whistle of the wind and the soft fall of snow upon the cabin roof remained. Abigail stood at the threshold, her hands trembling as they held the smooth branch. She closed the door gently and walked back to the hearth. In the flicker of the flames, she lifted the branch, turning it in the light. This was no broken limb. Its surface was cleanly carved, its tip carefully shaped as if made with intent. A sign, a message, a thank you from the mysterious tribe of giants. Abigail laid the branch with care upon the mantel beside the few mementos she had kept through her life, an old faded photograph, a wool scarf she had knitted by hand. And now this branch. Yet she knew this was no ordinary keepsake. It was proof that for one night she had been entrusted with what was most precious to another world. She sat down in her chair, her eyes resting on the fire. The cabin was quiet again, but the silence was no longer cold. The fire burned, and in her heart, another flame burned too, the flame of a memory that would never die. That stormy night had begun with fear. A strange cry in the woods, 2 trembling little beings huddled against her wall. It unfolded into kindness, a lonely old woman choosing to open her door to shelter 2 children not of her kind. And it ended in wonder, an entire tribe appearing not to destroy but to acknowledge, to give thanks. Abigail closed her eyes and let out a long breath. She knew that when the morning came and she looked upon the branch resting on her mantel, she would remember it all, from the frightened eyes of the little ones to the solemn nod of the leader. One night only, yet enough to change the way she saw the world. Perhaps what she had learned was simple. Even in the harshest darkness, compassion has the power to light a whole tribe. If you believe kindness can cross every boundary, share this story. And don't forget to follow Bigfoot Tales so you won't miss the next wondrous journey. The stories that just might change the way you see the world.